Hey everyone, and welcome back to this Over-the-Wire walkthrough where we're going through the server-side web security wargame titled Natas. And today we're on Natas 5, so we're just going to jump right in here and see what Natas 5 has in store for us. And you can see we're getting prompted for the auth now, so I'll just paste in the password there. And you can see we've successfully authenticated, however, access disallowed. Apparently we're not allowed to log in, and I don't actually see a way to have us log in. I think one of the first things I checked was to see if there's a login page anywhere, but you can see we're getting a 404 here. The requested URL was not found on the server, so you see there's no login page for us to look at. There's no admin console or anything. The trick here is to think about how the web sort of handles authentication and sessions and such. So if you think about HTTP, the protocol, it's what's called a stateless protocol because each request that you make to a web server, for example, has no knowledge of any of the other requests that were executed before it, which means, the web server has no way of identifying which user is asking for what. It just sees a bunch of requests and it serves pages accordingly. And also what that means is once your session ends, the connection between the browser and the server is lost, and it's sort of ephemeral in that case. But as you know, that's typically not the user experience we're used to. If you were to log into a website, close the tab, close the window, and come back shortly thereafter, there's a good chance you'll still be logged in. So you might be wondering, how is that possible? How do we do that? How did we overcome the sort of stateless nature of the HTTP protocol? And the way we typically do that is through a session ID, which is stored in a user's cookie or client cookie. These are stored on the client side, as I said. Typically, there's some shared info that the client passes over to the web server to identify that we are who we say we are, and to basically show the web server that, hey, look, we've already logged in. And this is typically done through a session ID or authentication cookie that is stored on the client side. And these authentication cookies are typically encrypted pieces of information, and they contain things such as a username, the token that the user uses to authenticate. So when the user visits the site again, the website is going to check for the presence of the user's authentication cookie or session ID cookie, and it's going to verify the user's identity using that encrypted information. So obviously this is what allows the user to stay logged into a website without having to re-enter their login credentials each time they visit it. And that's pretty much standard using these cookies for authentication. It obviously helps the user experience, making it easier for users to access authenticated accounts. It's not just used for authentication. Cookies are also used to maintain preferences, like whether you prefer a light mode or a dark mode theme on a website, for example. But it's also important to note that cookies can pose a security risk, especially if they're not properly managed, not properly secured or encrypted. If they can be decoded, like I said, cookies are stored on the client side, typically within the browser, and as such, it's quite trivial to manipulate them and change them to whatever you want, which is why properly managed web servers are going to encrypt this data, and only the web server will be able to decrypt it on the other side. So with that out of the way, what does this have to do with Natas 5? Well, we can actually take a look at cookies on any site that you're on, for example, through the developer console. So I think in the last level I showed this. So if we go to just hit inspect here, or if you hit F12 on your keyboard, that's going to open up the developer tools here. And depending on your browser, in this case I'm on Firefox, we're just going to go under the storage tab. I think in Chrome they're stored somewhere similar to this, but it's pretty trivial to find it essentially. But we just went under storage here, and if we zoom in, you're going to see a bunch of different tabs here. So you're going to have stuff like cookies, as I said, cache storage, local storage, which is also stuff stored on the client side but not typically sent over to the web server. But cookies are what we're after here. So if we drop this down, you can see we have a record here for this website, the URL that we're on. And if we click on this, these are all the cookies that are stored in our browser for this web page. There are also a number of browser extensions you can get to look at cookies as well, inspect them, modify them. But in this case, we can do it right through the developer tools here. And you can see here what looks like a database of sorts. These are all the cookies stored, as I said, on the browser for this website. And you can see we have the name and the value, so there's sort of this key value pair going on here, as well as some other information like HTTP only, secure, same site and stuff. These are sort of security features of cookies, which we might get into later. But in this case, you can see we have several ones here. We can pretty much ignore anything starting with these two underlines here. I believe this is Google Analytics stuff, and it's not actually relevant in this case, so I'm just going to delete those. But you can see we have this interesting cookie here named login, or logged in, and you can see the value is set to 0, which is actually interesting. Anyone familiar with this is going to have their ears perking up seeing a authentication, or what seems like an authentication cookie with the value of 0, because 0 typically denotes false and 1 would typically denote true. So you might be thinking, If this cookie is controlling whether we can see certain information or if we're logged in, if this is set to false currently, we might be able to change this to a 1 and have it set to true. And as you may have guessed, this is in fact the solution for this level. We're just going to need to change that to a 1, refresh the page, and once again, because these cookies are stored in our browser on the client side, we send them over with our request with whatever value they're set to. And if we send over a request saying that, well, in fact, we are logged in, we can actually have an effect on the logic of this web server and reveal the password. So how do we do that? Like I said, we can obviously do this through the browser, and I'll also show a get flag one-liner we can do in Bash. So in the browser, we're just going to double click on the value here. Like I said, this is sort of a name value or key value pair here. So we have logged in currently set to false, or what we think is false because it's 0. We're just going to change this to a 1 to denote true in most cases. And then once we click off of that, that's going to save. We can close out the developer tools here, and I'm just going to hit F5 or hit the refresh button here. And you can see after a refresh, we have been granted access. Now, how did this happen? Well, we can take a look in the console again. If we go under our network tab here in the developer tools, we're going to hit another refresh. You can see that first request here made to the root. And if we zoom in here and if we go down to our request headers, if you remember from last time, once again, these are just various pieces of information that were sent over in our request to the web server, containing things like our basic authentication, containing things like certain encoding language. But you can see we have this cookie header, which is a standard header you're going to find in a lot of web requests. And this is where essentially we're going to list out the cookies that we're sending or providing over to the web server from our client. And you can see we have our logged in cookie here. And quite simply, we've changed this to a 1 instead of a 0. And then, of course, the web server is evaluating that. It is listening for logged in equals 1. And if it finds that, well, the logic of this PHP page, assumingly, is going to give us the password here, which you can see. So once again, that is the solution. Quite simple, but we got to work with cookies, which are very exciting and fun to work with and manipulate. And I will show you quite a trivial way we can do this with curl as well, because curl allows us to set these cookies just from the command line. So for proof of concept, or just to give some context again, I'm going to curl that web page. So let me just copy it quick. And then obviously we need to present our authentication. So we're going to do TAC-U, and then we're just going to give it Natas 5, separated by a colon. And then once again, we're going to do a cat for, we actually saved it in Natas 4. Kind of confusing, but you get the point. And then what we're going to do here is add another argument to this command. We're going to do TAC-V, which is going to be verbose mode. And what that's essentially going to do is give us a lot more information, but one of the pieces of information particularly is going to be the set cookie header from the web server to our client. So again, that's run. We can see the source code of the web page or the HTML markup, but we can actually scroll up a bit here. We're going to find the actual response from the web server. You can see we got a 200 OK response, as well as all the headers or the response headers that the web server has sent over to our client. And you can see one of them here is set cookie, and we can see logged in equals 0. So this is essentially the default cookie or the default value of this logged in cookie. And that's what's being stored in our browser when we navigated to the page for the first time. But now we can get to the fun part, and that's going to be actually setting the cookie ourselves within our curl request, which will also allow us to sort of bypass that logic and reveal the password. So again, same command, we're just going to give it TAC-S to silence the output there for the progress bar and such. But here's where we're going to add our cookie. The syntax here is going to be 2 dashes, and then we can just type cookie, just like that. And then within quotes, double quotes, we can actually set a list of our cookies. And in this case, it's just going to be the 1. So we're going to type in the name of the cookie. And that's going to be logged in. And then we're going to set that to equal, well, not 0, that's going to be false. We're going to set it to equal 1. And we can make the request now, but I'm pretty confident this is going to work. So I'm just going to grep that to password so we can quickly reveal the password here. Now we can go ahead and finish our command to basically extract this value out and save it to the file. But there's going to be one caveat with the method we've been sort of going about doing this, and I can demonstrate that now. So if we just do as we've been doing, and we're essentially going to pipe this to the tr command, we can essentially translate a space to a new line character, and we're just going to run that. We're getting pretty much the same output as we have been, but you can see a caveat, a small caveat with this last line here. Because there's no space between the end of the password and this HTML closing div element, it's getting lumped in here, and our expected awk command is not going to work well with this. So what we're going to need to do is, as we've done before, use the cut command, and we're going to set a delimiter to this closing bracket just so we can chop this up nice and easy. So same command again, but we're going to pipe it to cut, as I said. We're going to specify our delimiter with TAC-D, and that's going to be, as I said, that closing angled bracket there. And then for our field, well, we're going to have 2 fields because there's only 1 delimiter here. And this is going to be the first field, and anything after that delimiter is going to be our second. So obviously, we're going to want to specify the first. And that's looking a lot cleaner. And we should be able to now pipe this out to awk. And once again, the syntax for that is going to be length. Want it to equal exactly 32. And then we want to print the line. And that looks good to me, so we can now just redirect the output here to our Natas 5 directory and save it as Natas 5. And there we go, just like that. We'll just test that really quick using our Natas script. We're going to be Natas 6, and then catting out that file. Perfect. You can see we're authenticated, and we are getting a hint to what the next level will entail. And before I forget, I will show you how to do this with Python requests as well. So to save time, what I'm going to do actually is just copy our natas4.py script, which we made in the last video. It's going to be quite similar. We're just going to make a simple change. We'll copy that over to Natas 5, and we'll call it the same thing, natas5.py. So now if we VI into that, you can see we have our old script here. And just to quickly go over what this does, if you remember, we're going to import the request module in order to make our request. We're setting a dictionary here, which we'll edit. And then we're setting a response variable to that module request.get, because we're making a get request. We're going to have to change the URL here, obviously. We're going to have to change headers to cookies, and then we're going to have to change the auth values. So first, I'm just going to make sure I have that URL updated to Natas 5, and then just paste in the correct password. And then we can move on to this dictionary here, which headers we're going to change to cookies. And then if you remember, same sort of syntax here. We're going to have the key or the name of the cookie, and then the value, which is going to be obviously the value. If you remember, it's called logged in. And then we're just going to set the value to 1, just like we did in the browser, just like we did with curl. Same value, same key. Then obviously, instead of passing headers over, we're not going to need to pass any specific headers. We're just going to pass the cookies argument. And we're going to set that to equal our cookies dictionary. Once again, same sort of idea, just quite a simple fix there, and that should work. So we're going to save that, and then we're going to run it here with Python 3. And hopefully this works. And there we go. You can see the same way with the curl request, we are making the request. We are passing over that cookie set to 1. We are defeating or bypassing the logic of this web server, and we are getting the password presented to us in the output. And just like that, we had a chance to explore manipulating cookies on the client side in order to bypass or defeat certain logic on the web server's end. And with that, thanks as always for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.